There we go.
Hey guys, it's Will. It's Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. Welcome back to the channel. If you are new to the channel, thank you for finding us. I thank you so much for finding us. If you want to give us a sub and a thumbs up and a comment and all that stuff, it would be much, much appreciated. Let me know what you think about this movie, about this release, what other movies you want to see me review, what Blu-ray releases I should be getting my hands on, and all that fun stuff. And a big shout out to our Patreons over on patrons? They're patrons on Patreon. There you go. Because that money supports this channel. That's where I buy so many. It's the money I use to buy so many of the releases that you see on the channel. Let's jump into the movie because I'm really excited to talk about what we're talking about today. And I say that genuinely because I fucking loved this movie and I had never seen it before. And I apologize for swearing. I've been swearing a lot more in these videos recently. I've been trying to keep them shorter. I'm trying to keep my energy up and I'm trying to keep the train moving. And then I start swearing because I get excited and I'm sorry. What are we talking about today? It's The Dead and the Deadly. Hell yes. So this movie is coming out from Eureka. Hopefully this video will be out on the release date because I'm filming it a couple days before the release date, and that release date is the 21st of November of 2022. I have the press release here, so you can actually see that, which is super cool. I love getting these in the mail. This film was directed by Wu Ma, who, as they say on the press release here, is one of the great multi-hyphenates in the history of Hong Kong cinema. He was a director, a producer, an actor, a writer, and all of these incredible things. And this is probably his most well-known movie as a director. This was released in 1982. It stars Sammo Hung and Lam Ching Ying, and Sherry Chung is in it, and Fat Chung. It is 91 minutes long, and it is the UK Blu-ray debut on a 2K restoration. You get the limited edition slipcase with the artwork from Darren Wheeling and the fantastic booklet with the essay that helps contextualize this film in terms of other Hong Kong supernatural films, ghost films, and kind of just like the era in which it existed, which I think was a period of big transition because as both Frank Jang, Michael Worth, Mike Leader, and Arna Venema talk about on their commentary tracks on this film, this movie was a very early example of a genre hybrid with a very specific type of humor. And so it's kind of a pivotal film in a lot of ways. I honestly, when I say I loved this movie, this movie was pure joy to me from the beginning until the end. I have nothing negative to say about it. I much preferred this film to Encounter of the Spooky Kind, which I also really enjoyed. So I'm not trying to knock Encounter of the Spooky Kind, which I reviewed summer of 2021, I believe, when this came out from Eureka. Fantastic release. And it actually shares like a color scheme with the Dead and the Deadly release. This comes with the poster and everything. But this is a great movie, but I much prefer Dead and the Deadly, which is to say it's like a great movie, I guess. But I loved this movie. Let me tell you why I loved it. Let me break it down for you. But I'm going to tell you about the release first in case you're already familiar with the film. And that way you can watch my kind of info on the release, decide whether or not you want to buy it, and then if you want to hear my take on the film, I will give you that. So you get a commentary from Frank Jang and Michael Worth. And you've heard me say a million times before, I love them together because Frank knows so much about the culture, the history, the language, the context, and Michael Worth as a filmmaker, as a martial artist, as an actor, as all these things, as an expert in like basher films and early martial arts films, brings so much to the table in terms of understanding the filmmaking, why they're doing what they're doing when they're doing it. Like there's an early shot in this film where Michael Worth talks about how the shot has been framed in such a way that objects within the frame are leading your attention towards the thing the director wants you to be looking at. He actually compares Wu Ma as a director to Spielberg at one point. He's like, one of the things he does really, really well is he does simple stuff, but that's excellent visual storytelling because you're always looking at what he wants you to look at. You're always thinking about and paying attention to what he wants you to think about and pay attention to. And he uses camera framing and movement to reveal the story visually. It's not just people telling you line by line what's going on, but it's actually really solid visual storytelling. So that analysis from Michael Worth is fantastic. Frank talks about the original title. He talks about Barry Wong, the screenwriter, and how his sense of humor is all over this movie. And he talks about like certain scenes where you really see the hallmarks of his sense of humor. I thought this movie was hilarious. Let me just tell you. I laughed out loud numerous times watching this film. Frank talks about historical references. He talks about all the puns. There's so much rude language in this movie, and a lot of it is translated in the subtitles, but Frank talks about other parts where there's like multiple meanings to the puns and like all this other stuff that you might not catch if you didn't speak Cantonese. It's just invaluable to have that information. And then Michael Worth kind of speculates on who Yoon Bu is in the film because there's some characters who have masks on and stuff like that. He's like, I think that guy might be Yoon Bu. Maybe it's that guy. It's like really fun. So then Mike and Arna, they talk about the Korean title of the film, which is really interesting because you don't usually hear that in these commentary tracks. And they talk about superstition in Hong Kong, like people, like, do people believe in ghosts? What do they believe in? The supernatural. Like, Arna actually lives in a building that's supposedly haunted, and so his rent is less than it would be in that type of building with that size apartment, with like that kind of stuff. It's like really interesting to hear stuff like that. And like I said, they talk about how this is an early example of this type of film, this type of genre hybrid. It's got early special effects in it. Actually, it's got some like really cool, like kind of ghosty special effects in it. They kind of remind me of Ghostbusters. They talk about Buddhist funerals, because that's a big feature of this film. And then the other bonus material, which is absolutely incredible. I cannot overemphasize how incredible this is, especially for me as a huge fan of Sammo Hung. And this has been a great year for fans of Sammo Hung, because so many, I mean, how many, Sammo Hung is in and directed how many of these releases behind me? Like, Eureka is just pumping out incredible Sammo release after incredible Sammo release. It's been like, 2022 has been the year of incredible Sammo Hung releases from Eureka Entertainment, and this is no exception to that. There's a 57-minute interview with Sammo Hung in here and a separate 21-minute interview. So there's like an hour and whatever that is, 18, 17 minutes worth of interviews with Sammo Hung in here, where he talks about his whole career. He talks about his whole life. He talks about his philosophy on filmmaking, why he shoots things the way he does, how he works as a fight choreographer, how he casts movies, what he thinks about character, action, structure, like all of this stuff. It's so good and amazing, and it blew my mind watching those interviews. I loved them. A+ release from me. I highly encourage you to go out and get it, and because I love the movie too. So let me talk about the movie. Let's get into that portion of the review. The music is fantastic. It's like synthesizer, like almost John Carpenter style music. This movie has a great atmosphere and mood, because it's kind of a ghost movie, but it's kind of not. So it has this kind of supernatural, creepy 80s John Carpenter slasher movie style thing going on with that music, but also it's something else, which I really appreciated. This movie is essentially two movies at the same time. You have a really silly comedy with Sammo Hung, and then you have what is actually kind of a serious movie about like greed, murder, betrayal. And what's so fascinating about this film is it's almost like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, if you're familiar with that play by Tom Stoppard. If you're not familiar with the play, it's a comedy in which two minor characters from Hamlet are the main characters. So Hamlet is like unfolding in the background, which is all this like, you know, murder, betrayal, like a horrible stuff that happens in Hamlet, the great tragedy of Shakespeare, while these two characters are being like bumbling, buffoon, idiot comedians, right? That's essentially what this movie is. You have this really serious movie about murder and betrayal and greed, and that has a lot of like backstabbing and tragedy in it. And then you have Sammo Hung in the middle of it being kind of a buffoon, like classic Sammo, where he's like very kind of earnest and innocent and a little bit dumb, but so funny. And he keeps getting involved in these situations where like really serious stuff is happening, and then it becomes like this ridiculous comedy. And to me, it works so well. The integration of those approaches and that kind of that way of stitching things together, it's just brilliant to me. And I just thought it was hysterical and really fun. And there are scenes that Sammo is not in that are like really serious, well done scenes of like betrayal and greed. And then you have Sammo stepping into it, and it just becomes this hilarious comedy. And it's almost like Abbott and Costello, where they would do like Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, where it's like scary monster movie, and it's like, just kidding, it's an Abbott and Costello movie, like that kind of shit. I just think it works really well. So the other thing I want to overanalyze about this movie is I'm going to switch on my writer brain, and we're going to talk about act structure, because this film is the first Hong Kong film I have seen in I don't even know how long that has a really clear, distinct, obvious third act in a way that an American mainstream film would have a very clear, distinct third act. Now, in order to talk about that, I kind of have to explain a little bit about mainstream American screenwriting and the way that the act structure works. In a typical American film, the primary goal of the second act, which is established kind of at the end of the first act, is over by the end of the second act, and the third act becomes a separate, distinct goal, rather than being a continuation of the previous goal. So in Hong Kong movies, typically what you see is what would be kind of the end of Act 2 in an American film is what would occupy the space of Act 3 in the film. So the climax conclusion of the film is typically what you would think of as the end of an Act 2 in an American film. So let me explain to you with 4 concrete examples I came up with what this really means. Saving Private Ryan. What is the goal of Act 2? To find and save Private Ryan. They find Private Ryan. Act 2 ends. Act 3 begins with the new goal of surviving the Nazi invasion of this town that they're in. right? And the third act is about a completely different thing. It's about that fight in that town because they've already found the guy they went out to find. Another example of this would be Predator. In Predator, the goal of Act 2 is to survive, right? They're being chased in the jungle by the Predator. I should also say I'm going to spoil all these movies, but I tried to choose movies that I would assume that basically everyone has already seen. So Predator, the goal of Act 2 is to survive the Predator. Everyone dies except for Arnold. Therefore, he needs a new goal and a new approach. So Act 3 is about him turning the tables and fighting the Predator rather than trying to survive and or escape it. Lethal Weapon, one of my favorite movies. This is also a movie that gets studied a lot in academic screenwriting programs because the structure is so good. Act 2 of that movie is about solving the case of the death of Amanda Huntsacker. It gets solved at the end of Act 2. Act 3 is revenge, get those bad guys. And then if you like children's movies, and maybe you haven't seen these violent movies I'm talking about, I actually just watched Wreck-It Ralph Breaks the Internet with my kids, okay? So the second act goal of Wreck-It Ralph Breaks the Internet is Ralph and Vanellope are trying to raise enough money to buy a replacement Candy Crush steering wheel from eBay. And the third act goal is that a virus is introduced to the internet and they have to stop the virus before it kills them and destroys the internet, basically. So you see that there are two distinct goals. This film has a distinct Act 3 in that very American sense of the goal of Act 2 ends. The film is not over because in ending, Act 2 presents a new problem which must be resolved in Act 3. And that's a really, I just thought that was really interesting because like I said, I honestly can't remember the last time I saw a Hong Kong movie where it had that really distinct American style act structure. Now, did they do that intentionally? I would guess probably not, because in 1982, I don't even think you had the apparatus in place where people were analyzing and writing books and discussing the three-act structure of the classic Hollywood film. I think that really kind of started later in the 80s. I might be wrong about that, but if memory serves, I don't think in 1982 anyone was talking about that. I think people had an idea of three-act structure and what it was and the way it worked, but that really rigid, solid definition of it I don't think really existed at that point in time. But again, I might be wrong, and correct me if I'm wrong if you know better than I do. So I just thought that was a really interesting thing about this film where they structured it like that. If you're a big fan of fight scenes, there are some fantastic fight scenes in this film, although I will tell you that it is not a fight-driven film. It is not about the spectacle and the awesomeness of fights. It's a movie about character, plot, comedy, betrayal, greed, that kind of stuff. But it does have some really awesome show-stopping fight scenes in it. So my name is Will. It is The Dead and the Deadly from Eureka Entertainment, coming out the 21st of November, 2022. I highly recommend this release. There's a lot of good bonus material, but I just really fucking love this movie. It was awesome. Like, I had never seen it before, and this is like one of my 10 favorite first watches of 2022 so far. So go out and check it out. I thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.